Today's story is about a case that police initially thought they'd solved pretty quickly. The pieces of the investigation came together relatively fast. They had a suspect, an apparent motive, everything. It looked like all that was left to do was to tie up a couple of loose ends, but it turned out that wasn't true at all. Instead, once detectives started pulling these threads, it was like there was just more and more and more. This would continue until they finally got to the end. That's where they would discover a hidden puppet master who had quietly been pulling the strings since the very beginning.
It's 911.
My husband's laying in the floor. I think he's dead. His name is Ernest Luttrell. His hands are tied behind him, and he's just a...
I got some help on the way, ma'am, okay?
The 911 call you just heard was made at approximately 11 a.m. on July 25th, 2010. It was placed by a woman named Ernest Luttrell, who said that she had just found her elderly husband Ernest unresponsive on the floor after returning home from church. Officers from Louisiana's Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office rushed out to the scene, a 60-acre hay farm in the community of Keithville. When they arrived, they found Loretta hysterical and standing outside of her and Ernest's farmhouse. Upon making their way in, it immediately became clear to police that this wasn't any kind of routine medical emergency. Ernest was lying dead in a pool of his own blood and had been shot multiple times. A coroner stated he would have likely died from his injuries very quickly. He was hit at least 5 times, including by one round which had struck him in the left eye. Now, Ernest Luttrell was the last person anyone expected to die in such an awful and violent way. At 73 years old, he was living a mostly simple and happy life. Ernest had been born and raised in Louisiana, and according to his friends, was your classic country boy. He was full of joy, liked to have a good time, and could be quite mischievous, but he also really believed in the value of hard work. After serving in the Korean War, Ernest had come back to Louisiana and found a good job working at the Borden Food Company. He also met his future wife, Loretta. Loretta already had a young daughter at the time, Katie, whom she'd had when she was just 15. Both of them were being taken care of by Loretta's mother, but Ernest stepped in and he and Loretta soon got married. For years, the couple scrimped and saved and lived very modestly until they were able to purchase the 60-acre hay farm in Keithville. It was a dream come true for Ernest, who had always wanted to have some land to call his own. Of course, farming is still difficult work, but after many more years, Ernest made the whole operation into a success. He was even able to hire some help, both to keep things running on the farm and to take care of him and Loretta as they got older. It seemed like Ernest had done everything right, worked hard all his life, taken care of his family, and never lived beyond his means. So the obvious question was, how could something like this have happened when he and Loretta were supposed to be enjoying their golden years? As detectives started processing the scene, it wasn't long before they uncovered their first clues. A gun cabinet in a room close to where Ernest had been killed was wide open, and it looked like there might be some weapons missing from inside. Additionally, a side door just past the kitchen was unlocked. When fingerprint powder was used on the floors, authorities found tread patterns from a pair of boots. There were a whole bunch of these tracks leading in and out through this area, showing the path the killer had likely taken. All of it suggested that this could have been some kind of home invasion robbery. The theory seemed even more credible when detectives spoke to Loretta. She confirmed that Ernest had a bunch of guns and that the cabinet inside should have been full. She also told them that something else was missing: Ernest's truck. It was a white 2005 Chevy 1-ton flatbed, which he drove pretty much all the time. The vehicle would be easy to spot because it had a large stainless steel tank on the back. Ernest had made it himself and used it to carry around diesel fuel for his farm equipment. Concluding that the killer had likely stolen Ernest's truck as well as his guns, police put out an alert for the vehicle to neighboring law enforcement. They also set up several road checkpoints and put out a phone number for a tip line through the local news so that the public could submit any potential sightings. In the meantime, they asked Loretta to come down to the police station so that they could get as much information as possible about exactly what had happened in the lead up to the crime. Loretta told detectives that the morning had started off very uneventfully. Other than going to church a little earlier than normal, she said that it had been like any other Sunday. She estimated she left the house around 8:30, returning just before she made the 911 call around 11 a.m.
The best way to just start right there when you woke up.
Yeah, the alarm went off, and I got up because I always said go to church. I left because I saw it was pouring down rain. And so I went ahead and got rushed and I got there rather early. And then when I opened the door, that's when I saw him.
Yes, ma'am.
And I called my friend. I was so upset. Tina that stays back there. She said, call 911.
Pretty quickly, investigators noticed a couple things that seemed off about Loretta's story. Not big things necessarily, just sort of weird things. Like, for instance, despite what she said about leaving early because of the weather, it hadn't actually rained anywhere in the area that day. Loretta also appeared to be confused about certain details, like that bit at the end there where she talked about calling her friend first before 911. She said that was because she wasn't sure if emergency numbers worked if she called them from her cell phone. This started to make more sense when, a few hours later, Loretta's daughter Katie showed up at the police station. She had driven there from her home in San Antonio, Texas, immediately after hearing about the murder. And when she learned that her mom had been questioned, she was very upset. She explained that this was because Loretta suffered from Alzheimer's disease and that she never should have been interviewed alone. She also shared something else detectives hadn't known about until that point. Ernest had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's too. This was something police were quickly able to confirm with others who were close to the Luttrells. One of Ernest's best friends, Larry, recalled how one day recently, Loretta had phoned him while she and Ernest were driving in town. She said that Ernest had asked her to call, but neither of them could remember why, and they had struggled to figure out his phone number. Larry also said that the last time he saw Ernest, he told him about a trip he'd taken into nearby Bossier City. It was a route that Ernest had driven countless times in his life, but suddenly he said he couldn't remember his way home. Ernest had driven around aimlessly for over an hour before he was able to find his way. Detectives wondered if Ernest's condition might explain why he was victimized. His Alzheimer's diagnosis was not a secret, so anyone who knew about it and had bad intentions might have seen him as an easy target. That being said, often in these cases, it's not strangers who abuse the sick and the elderly. It's people who were already in a position to take advantage of them. And, as it happened, there were two people who were clearly in such a position. Before, I mentioned that Ernest had been able to get some help around the farm and the house. He had hired a guy named Chris Tope, and later Chris's girlfriend, Tina Van McCurkey. Chris was kind of a jack of all trades around the farm, and Ernest liked him a lot. So much that he had purchased a trailer and put it on his property for him and Tina to live in rent-free. Tina, meanwhile, was the Luttrell's housekeeper. She also helped Loretta with everything she needed, which these days was quite a lot. Tina would do all of the shopping, would take care of errands, and would also drive Loretta most places she needed to go. Chris and Tina were both at the property when Loretta called 911, and Tina was the friend that Loretta referred to in that clip you heard before. So, as soon as detectives were finished interviewing Loretta, they sat down separately with them and asked them for their explanations of what had happened that morning. Chris's statement was pretty straightforward. He said that Ernest was a father figure to him and that he never would have done anything to hurt him. He also claimed that he wasn't aware of anything unusual happening at the farm until Tina had woken him up right around the time of the 911 call.
Ernest was like my dad.
And what time did you wake up Sunday?
When Tina come and woke me up at 11 Sunday morning.
Tina said that she had been awake that morning, but she had gone out to run some errands after Loretta went to church. She was able to show detectives a receipt for a local dollar store, which showed that she'd purchased several items there right during the crucial window of time between 8:30 and 11 a.m. when the shooting took place.
Where'd you go in Stonewall to get the pops?
You know where Family Dollar store is? Right there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What time was that?
I don't know. I got the ticket in my car. It would be stamped on there. I don't remember.
Do you have any idea who might have done this to Mr. Luttrell?
No, sir. I don't. There's a rock in his past, but that was before I knew him.
At this point, detectives were satisfied with what they had heard. Chris and Tina were allowed to go, and Loretta was released into her daughter's care. Unfortunately, this left police more or less where they had started. A home invasion robbery, but one with no clear leads on a suspect. However, that was about to change. It happened when authorities got a call through their tip line. It was about Ernest's missing truck. The call came in on July 26th, the day after Ernest's murder. A young woman said that she had seen a segment about the case on the local news, and that she believed that she had spotted the Chevy utility truck that morning while driving through the nearby city of Shreveport. He was parked outside of a residence at a small mobile home park. When police looked up the specific address where the woman claimed that she had seen the truck, they discovered the place belonged to a 26-year-old man named Eric Crane. Eric had a lengthy criminal history, but mostly for minor things like theft, property damage, and small-time drug offenses. Still, when authorities went to check the situation out, it quickly became clear that something was going on. When they got there, there was no sign of the truck, but what they did find was Eric hiding in his trailer. They discovered this after they knocked and received no answer, only for Eric to peek out the front door a couple minutes later. When he saw the officers, he slammed it shut again and tried to pretend he wasn't there. Because of the tip from the female caller, police had enough to get a search warrant for Eric's home. He continued to try and hide, though he was eventually flushed out with tear gas after the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office called in backup. While nothing incriminating was actually found inside of the trailer, Eric's actions started to make more sense when police were notified about another development. Around this same time, a patrol team searching the surrounding area had managed to successfully locate Ernest's truck. It had been left abandoned on a short gravel road leading to an oil drilling site. The spot was about a 3-mile walk from Eric's trailer. Testing on the vehicle would later show that his DNA and fingerprints were both inside. This was a big deal on its own, but detectives also noticed something else when they brought Eric in for questioning. The tread patterns on the boots that he was wearing matched those prints that had been left in Ernest and Loretta's home. In other words, he had now been linked to both the stolen truck and the murder scene. Even so, Eric continued to be uncooperative. He maintained that he had nothing to do with the crime and that he had no idea who Ernest Luttrell was.
Who is this Mr. Luttrell that you're talking about?
He was the man you put all the bullets in.
I didn't shoot nobody. I don't even know Mr. Luttrell.
Again.
Now, this was understandably annoying for detectives. They had believed that with this amount of evidence, Eric would offer some sort of a confession. Well, as it turned out, they weren't completely wrong. Eric did technically confess, just not in the way that they expected. You see, after investigators got fed up with Eric and he was arrested and sent off to the local jail, he made a phone call to his former boss, a man named Jimmy Sabbath. Eric had worked for Jimmy at his auto shop right up until recently when he had been fired. Despite this, when Eric was questioned by police, he used this job as his alibi for the time of the murder. When he called Jimmy, he was trying to get him to lie for him. If you know anything about how jail or prison phone calls work, you'll know that they are often monitored. So this was already a pretty terrible idea. But it actually got worse. It just so happened that right at the time Eric called Jimmy, he was being interviewed by a local news crew about the case. When Jimmy picked up the phone, he put Eric on speakerphone, leading to this gem of an interaction.
They said I murdered somebody.
Who was your son, Eric? Did you do it or not?
Yeah, I did.
So, yeah, at this point, it was safe to say authorities had Eric for Ernest's murder. But one of the reasons that they had hoped he would talk to them in the first place was that there were still a couple of pieces of the case that weren't quite fitting together. For starters, if Eric had used Ernest's truck as the getaway vehicle after the killing, how had he gotten to the crime scene in the first place? Also, what, if any, connection did he actually have to Ernest? Investigators would start to get these answers when they took another look at Eric's call records from jail. As it turned out, his former boss wasn't the only person he was trying to contact while behind bars. As embarrassing as the whole fiasco was with his inadvertent live TV confession, Eric Crane arguably messed up even more with his second phone call in jail. The call would turn out to be enormously consequential. It was to none other than Ernest and Loretta's housekeeper, Tina Van McCurkey. As soon as investigators discovered this connection between Eric and Tina, they knew that she had been hiding things from them. They quickly tracked her and Chris back down and brought them in for a second round of questioning. Chris's interview was more or less the same as last time. He really didn't seem to know anything about the crime, and police still genuinely believed he wasn't involved. However, he did give them one interesting piece of information. Contrary to what Tina had told them before, Chris said she hadn't started her morning at the Luttrell farm on July 25th. He explained that the day before, they had gotten into an argument. Tina had left and had spent the night at a local motel. As far as he was aware, she had only come back around 11 the next day when she woke him up. When detectives sat down with Tina and asked her about all of this, she was evasive. She started talking in circles, and the conversation dragged on for hours. Still, she insisted she wasn't involved in the murder in any way.
I love the locals. They give us a place to stay for free. I work for them. I make good money. And I wouldn't want nothing to happen to them.
As tedious as the conversation was, authorities used the time to their advantage. While Tina continued to deny any wrongdoing, other members of the investigative team obtained surveillance footage from the motel where she had been staying. When they reviewed it, they became even more confident that they were on the right track. In addition to showing Tina driving through the parking lot and going to her room, the footage confirmed the link between her and Eric Crane. He was captured in the video getting in and out of her car multiple times. Not only had he spent the night with Tina, he'd left with her on the morning of July 25th, shortly before Ernest was murdered. When Tina was confronted with this evidence, she finally cracked. She said that her and Eric had been sleeping together and that she had offered him $1,000 to kill Ernest for her. She explained that she had driven him to the crime scene that morning, and that while he carried out the murder, she drove into town to build up an alibi. She had dropped Eric off at the mailbox and had instructed him to steal Ernest's guns in his truck to make the killing look like a random robbery.
How did it all play out?
I drove him, Eric down there. There was 2 doors left unlocked, the sliding back door and the side door.
Carport?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
That's the door he went in. He said, Ernest come around from the living room into the kitchen. And he said that's when he shot him.
You come home, Eric's gone?
From getting the cigarettes, I noticed Ernest's truck gone.
Okay. What next?
Then I just assumed that he did know.
He carried out the plan.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this was a pretty stunning admission, but all the same, it still didn't quite make sense. I mean, Tina herself had pointed out that she had no reason to want Ernest dead. He had given her a job and a place to live, and now she didn't have either. Why would she have set all of this up? And how could it possibly have benefited her? Sure enough, it wasn't long before Tina made this ominous statement.
You want to know what it is? You want me to tell you what I told you?
Tina explained that it had all started a couple of years back, in 2008, when Ernest sold the drilling rights on the hay farm to a natural gas company. The deal netted him $400,000, which added to his property and other assets, made his and Loretta's total estate worth over $1 million. Around this same time, Loretta's granddaughter, Kimberly, so Katie's daughter, was in the middle of college. Because of this new windfall, Ernest had agreed to help pay for her education. Well, according to Tina, Ernest was pretty old school, and he didn't really understand what he was getting himself into. He thought he was on the hook for like a couple $1,000s, but Kimberly actually had between $50,000 and $70,000 in student loans. When the time came for Kimberly's graduation, Ernest backed out of paying the entire sum, and instead had Loretta send her a check for $2,000. Tina said that this had infuriated Loretta because she felt that Ernest had cheaped out and lied to her granddaughter. She couldn't do anything because Ernest completely controlled the finances, but she knew she would get everything once he died. That's when Loretta decided that Ernest needed to go.
She came to visit. She told Ernest, hey, you remember you promised to pay for my college?
That's when they went to Texas
Oh, they
for
went to
Kimberly's
Texas?
graduation.
Okay.
That's when she had asked him for that money. This is Loretta, what she's told me. The only way I see out is to have him killed, and I can sell land and get my granddaughter Kimberly the $50,000. I hate Ernest for lying to my granddaughter Kimberly, and she really hated him for that.
As for her part in all of this, Tina claimed that she never wanted to be involved, but she felt she didn't have a choice. You know, Ernest may have been the one paying her, but at the end of the day, she worked for Loretta, and Loretta made it clear that she could either help her arrange Ernest's murder, or she'd be fired and she'd have to find another place to live. Tina said that she reached out to Eric Crane because she knew he was always desperate for money. She knew this because Eric was her daughter's ex-boyfriend. For you eagle-eyed viewers out there, yes, that means Tina was sleeping with her daughter's ex. That's pretty yucky to think about, so I'm just gonna leave that there. Anyway, as gross as that last bit was, Tina had spent a lot of time lying to detectives, so they needed to try and verify her story. They did this by having her call Loretta on speakerphone while they listened in, telling her that they needed to get together the money that they owed Eric Crane. It quickly became clear that Loretta knew exactly what Tina was talking about.
Eric, the man, shot Ernest for you. He managed to get out on bond about an hour ago, and he called me and looking for $1,000 so he can get out of town.
Yeah, if I could get it to you, I don't have no way to get it to you.
Shortly after this call, Loretta was arrested and taken in for questioning again. She now admitted that she knew about the murder-for-hire plot. However, she pointed the finger back at Tina, saying that she had abused their close relationship to trick her into doing all of this.
So you knew that when you came home Sunday, what you were going to find. You knew what was going to happen that day.
Yeah. She wanted rid of Ernest because she thought, she had me fooled. She could get anything she wanted out of me.
So, who was really the mastermind behind Ernest's murder? Was it Tina or Loretta? Well, it turned out the answer was both of them, and neither of them. Allow me to explain. As I said before, detectives were already convinced that Tina hadn't cooked this whole plot up on her own. She was definitely intimately involved, but the motive just wasn't there. Ernest being dead made her life worse, not better. With Loretta, the motive was there, but once again, authorities had their doubts. There was no question that she knew what was going to happen to Ernest and had taken part in the plan, but it was a question of ability. That whole thing with the Alzheimer's diagnosis, that was all true. Many people confirmed that Loretta's health had been seriously declining over the past couple of years, so police just didn't think she was capable of arranging all of this. Something was still missing. Investigators finally discovered what that was when they started to hear about the legal battle that was playing out in civil court over Ernest's estate. As I mentioned earlier, originally when Ernest died, all of his money and assets were supposed to go to Loretta, but because she had since been accused of being involved in his murder, that was no longer the case. Now people on both sides of the family were desperately scrambling to assert their claims to the $1 million estate. No one was fighting harder, though, than Loretta's daughter, Katie Passaniti. Specifically, Katie had been able to produce this will, which said that in the event that her mom wasn't able to collect on what Ernest had left for her, everything would go to her instead. Now, this made no sense to Ernest's family members. Even though Katie was Loretta's daughter, her and Ernest had never been especially close. You see, even though Ernest had come into Katie's life when she was just a little girl, they didn't really have a normal stepfather-stepdaughter relationship. As I already said, Loretta was very young herself at the time that she had Katie, so her own mother did a lot of the parenting. From the sounds of it, when Loretta and Ernest got married, they kind of went off and did their own thing. They were both still a part of Katie's life, but the three of them never really lived together as a family. It wasn't until later when Katie grew up that her and Loretta had gotten closer, and Katie really started taking on a larger presence once Loretta was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. When detectives found out about all of this, they started digging more into Katie's life. On the surface, it looked like she was very successful. She had multiple STEM degrees, including a doctorate in applied mathematics. She even spent time as a professor at a local college near her home in San Antonio. However, sometime in 2008, Katie quit her job. The following year, her husband also became unemployed, and they racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt. This was all while their daughter Kimberly had been in college that they thought Ernest would be paying for. To investigators, this was already looking like it could be a motive, but things got even more interesting when they took a look at the will Katie had produced during the legal battle over the estate. The document was dated just 3 weeks before the murder. It wasn't just the timing that was suspicious, though. Ernest's family members said that they didn't think he ever would have signed something like this. Following up on this, authorities reached out to the notary whose name was on the will, a woman named Penny. When they brought her in for questioning, she almost immediately told police everything. Penny confessed that the will was indeed a fraud. She claimed that she didn't know that at the time, though, and thought she was simply helping out a friend. Penny explained that Katie had approached her 3 full months after Ernest was killed and said that she was desperate. She claimed that the only way to stop her mom from losing everything was if all of Ernest's estate went to her instead. In order to do that, though, she needed this will to be notarized, and she needed it to look like it had been signed before Ernest's death. Penny stated that she was extremely uncomfortable with all of this, but she eventually caved because she felt sorry for Loretta. But she said that there was no way she was willing to go to prison to cover up Katie's lie. In order to save herself, Penny agreed to call Katie while police listened in. When she picked up, Penny asked what she should tell police when they started asking her questions about the forged will.
That Loretta was there, Ernest was there, they all had on jeans. Ernest wears glasses, he's left-handed.
Well, what happens, if I lie and I get in trouble? I want to go to jail. I'm not gonna lie to go to jail.
Well, if you don't, you're gonna go to jail. I could write everything down. Then you'd have to memorize it and tear it up.
For those of you keeping track at home, that's the third person in a row in this case to incriminate themselves over speakerphone. Thankfully, it also proved to be the end of the Russian doll-like trail of masterminds responsible for Ernest Luttrell's murder. When police conducted a search of Katie's home in San Antonio, they found a bunch of Ernest and Loretta's financial documents. They also discovered pieces of paper where it looked like someone had been practicing to write Ernest's signature over and over again. Through further investigation, they would later learn that Katie had been meddling in her mother and stepfather's affairs and trying to get her hands on their estate for some time. She had been furious when she found out that Ernest sold the drilling rights on the hay farm in 2008 because she felt that the property should rightfully be her inheritance, and she worried this would lower the value. She was also extremely angry about the situation with her daughter's student loan money. When Loretta and Ernest were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, though, she felt that she had finally found a way in. She knew her mom felt guilty about how she had treated her as a child, and now that Loretta was sick, she also knew that she needed her help. Katie used this newfound reliance to convince her mom that they would be far better off without Ernest around. With him out of the way, she would have access to all of the money, and she could properly take care of her. The murder for hire had not been the first plot. Initially, Katie had wanted to poison Ernest, but eventually she decided against it, fearing that testing after his death would reveal what had happened. She next pursued the idea of having Loretta mess with Ernest's Alzheimer's medication, but this hadn't worked either. Even when she finally did decide to go forward with the murder for hire, though, she went about it in an extremely calculated way. She knew that she needed to distance herself from everything so that the crime wouldn't be linked back to her, especially if she successfully wanted to get her hands on Ernest's money. That's why she had used her mom and Tina. Though they both participated in the murder, it was Katie who was quietly pulling the strings the entire time. After all of this was uncovered, Eric, Tina, Loretta, and Katie were all charged with murder. Eric and Tina both took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Katie in exchange for being spared the death penalty. They were both sentenced to life without parole. In May of 2013, Katie was also handed a life sentence, plus an additional 60 years for conspiracy and multiple forgery convictions. As for Loretta, she was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial and was sent to a psychiatric facility. Her health rapidly declined from the time of her arrest onwards, and in 2014, she died at the age of 74. I don't know about you, but I find stories where the elderly are taken advantage of to be especially hard to stomach. The Alzheimer's aspect of this case in particular is something that really hits home for me because, as I've mentioned before, it's a condition that I have some experience with. The idea of Ernest working hard his whole life just to be plotted against by some of the people that he trusted the most is almost too heartbreaking to imagine. And the fact that it was all over nothing more than greed is quite frankly horrifying. It wasn't just the subject matter that made this one tough to put together, though. There were a lot of moving parts in this story, especially with the seemingly endless trail of masterminds. Hopefully the layout was clear, but as always, I'm interested to hear all of your thoughts about this one in the comments section below. At the time of this recording, Eric Crane, Tina Van McGurky, and Katie Passaniti all remain incarcerated.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, everyone, and take care.